Okay, now we got that unscheduled. I think we were kind of wrapping up the end of study. The takeaway was just if the patient had any critical values or SAEs, we need to follow up per either clinical practice or the study protocol. Okay, we got those unscheduled visits. Self-explanatory. We bring patient in that's outside of the window of the protocol. Typically, we do these to assess AEs or SAEs. They called us and let us know that they experienced either one of those situations, and their next visit is 3 or 4 months out. We don't want to wait that long to kind of follow up with the patient. So good clinical practice will be to bring that patient in to assess what's going on. Also at that time, if the initial medical release form that they have signed has expired, might want to get them to sign another one so we can get those medical records related to that SAE or AE if they had to go to a urgent care or their PCP because of it. You want to keep those in the charts for the PI's reference. That should help him or her determine if the IAE is related to the IP or not. We also can bring a patient in for an unscheduled visit for a redraw or to get a lab. So if they was just very dehydrated on that scheduled visit and you couldn't get any blood to come in, you can bring them in the next day or next couple of days to get that lab. Now, depending on the protocol, you might still be able to use the kit associated with that visit versus using an unscheduled visit kit. So in those scenarios, if they came in for week 2, visit 3, and you were unable to draw their blood, but they came in the next day, typically you want to use that same kit. You just need to put in a progress note or the comment section of that requisition form as to why the visit day and the lab collection day does not match. But typically the protocol does not want you to pull that unscheduled kit when the blood draw is so close. It's the next day. So and sometimes unscheduled visits also can take place if you just need to re-educate the patient on compliance. If they are supposed to do their e-diary 5 days a week and they're only doing it 2, bring them in. Let's go over the e-diary process again. Let's, if they get a email prompt or text message prompt, make sure that they know how to get to their email or their text message within the device that you have provided. So unscheduled visits can also be for re-education. So whatever the PI deems, and typically when you do an unscheduled visit and you go to chart it in the system, there's a checklist. So if you did not recollect labs, if you did not do vital signs, whatever you did not do, make sure you specify that in that checklist. You only want to document in the EDC system the tasks in which you actually did. Not all visit windows will have these types. A lot of protocols don't have these types. But again, dealing with vaccine studies, we did have a visit type called the illness visit, and that is if the patient exhibited some symptoms regarding the indication that we were following up. They had within 72 hours to come into the clinic so we can do necessary testing, swabs, lab draw, and PI physical exam. So, like again, 9 times out of 10 you won't have this visit type, but if you do, this is what an illness visit is if they're studying a particular indication that they want you to bring the patient back if they have exhibited those symptoms. You need to follow the protocol, whatever window that is. Home visit is self-explanatory. There's some studies that are set up where the patient can do home visits versus to have to come in. A lot of these times, these are set for people who have rare conditions. A lot of times, if you have a rare condition, you don't have a readily clinical site to see you. So instead of you having to drive 3 and 4 hours for every visit or fly for every visit, even though you're participating in that site in a different area or a different state, they designed the protocol where some of those visits can be conducted at home. They'll partner with the home health agency that home health nurse or study coordinator will go out to that person's house, and they'll conduct the visit, and then they'll scan in the source documents to the primary study coordinator. Okay, so how to prepare for these visits. So you want to make sure you're familiar with the protocol. Typically, how you can, I don't want to use the word convince, but convey the protocol to the subject, you need to know the basics. The basics is the inclusion exclusion criteria, the ones that's not related to a lab result or EKG testing. But hey, you can't have XYZ, you need to have XYZ. You need to know those off the bat, because that's how you can determine if you need to move forward with that patient. Typically, if the patient is immunosuppressant, have a kidney disease, have liver disease, hepatitis B or C, has HIV. Typically, those are the common exclusion factors for any trial. Not all trials, but most. Most trials do not want to put the patient at risk if they already have those conditions. You want to be able to present the duration of the trial. So, is the patient going to be in a trial 1 year, 2 year, 3 years? Will they be on the study medication for that whole time period, or is there a time period where we just monitoring their side effects? You want to be able to clearly convey that information. Side effects. So we have what's called the investigational brochure. It lists the chemistry of the drug, the known side effects that they saw in the preclinical trial, the phase 1 trial, the phase 2 trials, how, depending on what progression you are in this trial. It should have that information in the investigator site file. And so you want to, and it also will be found in the consent form. It's a criteria that needs to be in the consent form. So you want to let the subject know what are the known adverse events related to the study medication. And also keep in mind, the reason why we investigating, because there are going to be some unknowns. So compensation. Will they be paid for their time? Will they not be paid for their time? The subjects typically want to know that. Some people are willing to participate without compensation. Some people are not, and that's their right. Give the participant time to read over the informed consent. Now, what I used to do, and it was based on what the doctor had indicated, I used to go through my principal investigator's schedule, and if I saw that there was a potential person that's in the upcoming visit that can possibly be good for the study, I will email them the consent form, introduce myself. Hey, I work with your standard of care physician XYZ, or or I work for the principal investigator, and he or she is the colleague of your standard of care, because we had 3 that were in clinical research, but we had about 12 endocrinologists, so not all of them participated in clinical research, but I had the right to scan all of their schedules. And I encourage them to discuss it with their primary care physician or their endocrinologist if it was not one of my PIs. And I encourage them to read over it. When you take the pressure off that they need to hurry up and make the decision, people are typically more willing to participate. And ensure that someone qualified and designated is available to answer questions. So some protocols say that the person completing the informed consent process has to be a licensed person. So it has to be an MD, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, or a nurse. And some say the person just has to be delegated, trained, and follow your local laws. So it's very critical that we know the difference. My whole 10 years, I think I had experienced 2 studies where I was not allowed to complete the informed consent process. One was a thyroid cancer study, and I want to say the other one was a rare disease study. And I think it was because they just wanted to make sure there was somebody medically qualified there to discuss the drug components and the side effects and that sort of thing. So it's important. Another thing I will say about that informed consent process situation. We have that site delegation law. We need to make sure that that person is delegated to perform the informed consent process. Because just because they're a study coordinator, just because they're a sub-I, does not mean that the PI checked that box for them to complete that task. So we want to make sure that they're not only qualified, but designated, because that is a finding if it's a person who is completing the informed consent process has not been delegated. And that's also a finding that has to be reported to the IRB. Run-in period, just ensure the PI, the overall thing is just make sure the PI has checked off on what's required for the person to proceed to this um, process of the trial, and it is important to understand whether or not the drug is blinded or unblinded. So some protocols say we can let the patient know, hey, you taking these drugs, but it is a placebo. So you really shouldn't experience any side effects, but let us know if you do. And some drugs want to keep the patient blinded, so they want the patient to think that they're taking the active drug, and this just removes any biasness. And if and they don't want us to let the patient know that they're taking a placebo. So it's important to know if the protocol specifies that. And then just again, based on my medical error, just make sure you verify the proper drug dispensing kit number. Okay, so this discussion questions. Why do you think it is a question rather? Why do you think it is essential to know whether the run-in medication is blinded or unblinded for your participant?
I just want to verify when you say running medication, are you talking about the investigational drug?
Yeah, the investigational drug, but the one that they're taking through in the run-in period. Why you think it's important to know whether or not it's blinded or unblinded?
Well, I believe from what you said earlier, the run-in period is to test compliance. So again, I know from when I'm working with participants, I always like to explain to them if something is blinded or unblinded and explain in a scientific realm what does that mean, in terms of making sure that they understand how the labeling is going to look, even
Mhm.
understanding about who will be dispensing medication to them. Like if I am the unblinded staff, I will be the one that will be getting the medication ready. Let's say it's a investigational product that has to be injected, versus if I am the person who is blinded, which I have been also, I just like them will not know the exact medication that they are receiving. I know also sometimes with blinded medications, I believe even like if it's in a vial, the vial will have like a different coloring to it, so you can't.
Mhm.
It's like just to give them that again on a very layman's level basics terminology so that they can understand the process.
Mhm. And the reason why I think it's essential that the patient that we know whether or not to disclose blinded or unblinded to the patient is because to remove bias. If people taking the placebo, they might be more likely to take it because they know, okay, well, this is not gonna mess with me, so I'll take it. But when they get the actual study drug, that compliance goes down the window because they don't know, okay, well, I don't know if this the real deal is or not, or vice versa. If they feel like they're getting the active drug, they're anxious to get their A1C down, they're anxious to get their kidneys functions back up. They might be more willing to take the medication, but just so happens they get randomized to a placebo or comparator, and they notice that the feeling they got when they first did the run-in period compared to what they're randomized to is not the same. Then compliance might be off. So the overall reason is not to inform them if the protocol says not to, is to remove that unconscious bias. Okay, so practical techniques for visits 4 and 5. Just ensure that before you randomize the subject, that the PI or the designee has reviewed the inclusion checklist, medical history, that sort of thing. Ensure that you complete the visits in order as per protocol. So you have some protocols to say we want the vitals first, we want the EKG next, we want the labs last, and we want you to administer the medication. Some assessments say administer medication, get the vital signs, post a certain time period, then get the labs, then get the EKG. So it is again back to that documenting time. If we as the CRA, as the monitor, know that the protocol is very strict on which assessment comes first. When we review that source documentation at that screening visit, we need to make sure the site has a place to capture time. They don't capture time, then we can't verify what was done first. Now, you typically, when you do an EKG, it's time stamped. When you draw labs, the requisition has a space for time, but not your vital signs, always, and not the time of administration of the IP. So we want to make sure time is collected. Uh, maintenance or treatment visits. Again, if there was any more inclusion exclusion criteria that need to be met, we want to make sure that has been done. Every time a patient comes in, we want to make sure there are no changes in medical history, there's no changes in concomitant meds. So even though they're taking the study medication, they also taking their background medication. And sometimes background medication can contradict the investigational drug. So if we have a list of prohibited meds, every time that patient comes in, we want to make sure they're not taking those prohibited meds, because sometimes participants don't want to convey that they're participating in a clinical trial with their primary care physician, and they might alter their background medication and it might conflict with the investigational product. So it's very important that these are asked at every visit, and up to have you experienced any adverse events. We want to complete these type of visits in order. We want to do the assignment assessments per protocol. We want to make sure that we pull the correct uh, kit, and we want to make sure we're filling out the correct source. And what I mean by that, all assessments that required in visit 3 might not be required in visit 8. And so if you pull the wrong source of documentation, and you don't have the protocol with you, but you're just completing the assessments based on what's on that source, you might leave out something, or you might collect something or complete an assessment that you didn't have to because it was not required per that visit. And unfortunately, that will be considered a protocol deviation. So if you collect the lab for visit 5 and visit 5 did not require a lab, that's a protocol deviation. If you collect, now typically they don't do it for vital signs, because sometimes PIs just want to do vital signs because the patient might appear not to be themselves. So it's typically you don't get a protocol deviation for doing extra vital signs, but sometimes with that lab or how you administer the drug, that would be a protocol deviation. Okay, the end of treatment, again, you just want to document why the subject is ending the treatment. Is it subject um, facilitated? Is it PI facilitated? If it's sponsor facilitated? Because sometimes the background people who doing data analysis or collecting the information, they might say, hey, this person's labs are consistently in critical value. We might want to not pull the patient out the study, but we might want to end treatment. So they can make that call as well. So whatever the reason, the takeaway is just to make sure that it is documented. The end of study, we want to make sure that if reconsent is required, that it takes place. Typically not at this point. For everybody, but some people might, if they started 3 months before another group started, they'll be finishing 3 months early. So if a protocol amendment has taken place, they still need to to sign that reconsent form. So if a reconsent is required, you want to do that before you do any assessments. You want to confirm contact information because in the event we find out some bad safety information about the investigative product and the sponsor want all participants notified, we need to make sure before they leave off the trial that we got good contact information. We also want to make sure that contact information is good because again, if they experience an AE or SAE and it was determined to be related to the IP, we need to follow up with them. Um, we want to verify continuation of concomitant medications. So when a person ends a study, they might have stopped some of their background medication or they might have started some. So you just want to attempt to get end dates for their concomitant medication. You want to also try to attempt to close any AEs. And these two things should be done also during the maintenance period. You don't want to wait to the end of the trial to try to close the AE. If they reported an AE at visit 3, at visit 4, you want to see if that AE has stopped. If it hasn't stopped, then you want to make sure at visit 5 it has stopped. You want to always attempt to close AEs or SAEs. Please inform the participant that you will follow up if any concerns about the lab value. Again, that's just good clinical practice. And thank the patient for their participation. If we don't have patients participating, none of us will have a job. We can do all the science and the preclinical work. We can do all the work to develop the investigational product. We can make contracts with all the vendors. But if we don't have participants, all of that will be for nothing. So it's important to thank the participant for their participation. Okay, so we already did the break. So uh, again, unscheduled visits, just going to do the checklist, just mark off what you actually did at that visit. Make sure you pull the correct source and the correct kit. Illness visits, just make sure you follow the protocol, the time window. You inform a PI or medically qualified person that the sick patient is coming in the event that they have to do a physical exam. If you have at home visits, you want to verify the subject's address. You want to verify if there's any barriers to accessing the residence. Some older patients might stay in assisted living and you got to go through a gate and you got to put in a code. They might stay in a gated community and you got to go through security. So you want to get all those nuances charted in the patient's chart so you can convey that to the home health services individuals. You also want to know if there's any pets. I'm super afraid of dogs. So if I'm, coming into a house to do a visit and they got 8 dogs, I want to know that ahead of time. They might need to they will need to get another coordinator if it's me, because I ain't gonna be able to do it. Or they can put the dogs up. I'm just scared of dogs. So we already did break time. Okay, so the visit types for monitoring visits. So before we get to that point, the site has to do these steps. And the first one is the letter of interest. So the PI will get an email. The sponsor or the CRO will reach out and say, "Hey, we got this study coming up. Will you be interested?" And it'll be a letter that they'll just sign with a little brief synopsis of the protocol, the indication of so if it's like, again, I was diabetes. So if it was type 1, type 2, whatever endocrine disorder, it'll have just a little brief little thing. But it's basically saying I'm willing to participate. So if that PI is willing to participate, they'll sign, send it back. Then after that, they'll get the confidentiality disclosure agreement, or the CDA. That's a little bit more involved. Usually the legal teams are involved. I worked at an academic organization, so it was not only between the sponsor and the PI, it was between the sponsor, the organization, and the PI. So the site has to follow whatever their standard operating practices are, but it is a legal document. So once, and that's why I said usually the legal team is involved. Once this is signed, whatever information you receive about that trial from that point on, you cannot disclose. The site cannot disclose. Um, it's between the PI and a joint agreement between the PI and the organization. Feasibility questionnaire, or the FQ. It is usually a series of questions, and it's basically asking the PI about their site and how they plan on recruiting. So, how much staff you have. Typically, do you recruit your patients just from your own database? Do you do physician to physicians letters? Do you all use social media? Do y'all use radio advertisement? Whatever their recruiting efforts are, they want to disclose this in the feasibility questionnaire. And they also want to know the ratio of individuals screened failed to randomized. So some trials are competitive enrollment, where first come first serve. Some trials is we only want you to do 20, and based on randomizing 20, how many people do you have to screen to get 20? Can you screen 25 and only 5 failed? Would you have to screen 30? Would you have to screen 40 and to get to that 20? So that is what's discussed in the feasibility questionnaire. And then this is basically what's equivalent to the sites using the protocol. The monitoring plan is equivalent to the monitors or the CRAs to follow far as their monitoring schedule. So this is our protocol. If you want to be a CRA, every time you get a study, you're going to be given a monitoring plan. And that is a detailed document of what visits you have to complete and what you have to do at those visits and what are the time frames. So sometimes you'll have an SIV and you're required to initiate the investigational product. And sometimes you'll have an SIV where the drug should already be there and you need to do an inventory check. Some monitoring plans indicate you have to be on site within 7 days of the first randomized patient. Some monitoring plans say we want you on site 4 weeks after your SIV. We want you whether they randomize the patient or not. We want you on site at that time period. So whatever the CRO has contracted with the sponsor, visit frequencies, you will have this in your monitoring plan. Any questions about that? Okay. Okay, so then you will complete what's called the site qualification visit, or the SQV. And it's also known as the pre-study visit or the site assessment. It is vital step in clinical trials to assess the readiness and capabilities of a potential research site. So typically what we gather from here is the site credentials. We want to know how many doctors you have, how many nurses you have, how many nurse practitioners you plan to put on this trial. Will the study coordinator do everything, draw the labs, do the processing, or do you have a lab tech? Do you have a data entry person? So that is what is typically required at the site qualification visit. Then what are your good clinical practices? What SOPs do you have in place to recruit? What SOPs do you have in place to chart? What SOPs do you have in place to minimize protocol deviations? And brief discussion about that sort of thing. Recruitment methods. A lot of times between the feasibility questionnaire and your site qualification visit are months. They can be months apart. So again, they want to go over what is your recruiting methods. If the protocol requires specific equipment or access to ancillary diagnostic testing. They want to know if it's on site or will you have to send a patient away. So if the patient needs a DEXA scan, a bone density scan, do you have the capabilities on site or do you have to contract a third party vendor? If they need an ultrasound or MRI, will you be able to do it on site or will you have to contact a third party vendor? So these other questions are usually on a checklist for the site qualification visit, and they can make or break whether or not the sponsor or the CRO chooses that um, site to participate. And then you want to look at your monitoring space. You want to take a tour of the facility. You want to see where the lab kits are stored. Where will they process the labs? How many exam rooms does the site have? Do they have one designated room to research and the rest of them are standard of care, or do the facility has the capabilities to see the patient in any room? So those are kind of things are discussed through the site qualification visit. Okay. Once the site has been determined that they can participate by the sponsor, then you're going to get the red light to complete the site initiation visit. And this is a meeting is scheduled before study enrollment to ensure the site is prepared to conduct the trial in accordance with the protocol and good clinical practice guidelines. So, what do I want to make sure. I want to know the PI's availability. I do not want to vast majority of the SIV you're gonna talk to the site staff, but not all of that information is related directly to the PI. So you want to know your presentation, your slides, and know which slides I need to present to the PI and which slides the PI really doesn't need to be involved in. Typically, you want to the PI needs to be involved in the protocol overview, which it would include the inclusion exclusion criteria. They need to be in the section related to AEs and SAEs, and they need to be available to discuss PI responsibilities. Typically, the EDC system that you're going to use, the lab that you're going to use, all of those things can be discussed with the people who are going to complete those tasks. Of course, you're gonna send once you got everybody schedule aligned, then you're gonna send a confirmation letter. The follow-up letter is not done until the visit is completed and you've written your report. But I just combined those together because they both are letters. Again, you're gonna discuss briefly with the PI his recruitment strategies. You want to be flexible. So even though you may have this great agenda, and it said at 10 o'clock that you're supposed to talk to the PI might got called to an emergency. So now you need to rearrange how you're going to do your presentation and discuss those things towards the very end or when the PI will be available. So you just got to know not always what we plan is going to be what's get executed. So we got to make sure that we are flexible. Complete the PowerPoint training yourself before you present it to the site. So make sure you are aware of what's in that PowerPoint presentation. Allot time for the tour of the facility. So just in case it's been a lot of time between the qualification visit, or you're not the same person that completed the qualification visit as the CRA, you want to make sure that you tour the facility yourself. You want to verify the site has received any study materials, including IP. So if per the IV, they said that the site should already receive the initial kit supplies, their initial study e-diaries, their IP, whatever has been determined that they should already have before you came on site, you need to lay eyes on that material. And then once you're done doing your presentation, you did your tour and you're talking to everybody, then you want to review your investigational site file or your ISF. What you're looking for in these documents, are you looking for the credentials? So, although they say they have 5 licenses, MDs. You want to make sure that those licenses are current and filed. You want to make sure if they have nurses, you want to make sure their medical license are current and filed. You want to look at GCP training, IATA training. You want to complete your training log of the SIV. Now, I didn't think that this was possible, but it is. I've seen people who perform SIVs and do not have the site complete the training log saying that they performed the SIV. So it is very important as a CRA when you conduct the SIV, everybody that was present during that presentation, you document that on a training log. Okay. So please, please, please do not forget to do that. And the reason why this is so important, because a lot of times we have a lot of people on the delegation log, but not all those people participated in the site initiation visit. So everybody that did not participate in the site initiation visit, they need to complete training, whether that is a phone call with you, whether that's done by the principal investigator, or whether they have indicated they reviewed the slides that you left. But they need to have documentation that they trained before they start on the study. Booster visit. A booster visit is usually done when we're having some issues at the site. We can have low enrollment, when they completed their feasibility questionnaire, they told us they can give us 20. They haven't been able to even screen one. So we need to do a phone remote visit to figure out what's going on. Did you over exact, you don't want to ask them that, but you want to, directly, but you want to ask them, did you over exaggerate your numbers? Did you have a decrease in patient population or patients interested? Was the timeline between the site qualification visit and when the study actually opened was so long that those participants are no longer interested? And you want to find out why they're not recruiting. And then you want to ask them, hey, what has worked in the past? Let me ask the sponsor if we can do a social media campaign. Let me ask the sponsor if we can do physician letters to get you up and running. Go ahead.
Yes, I do have a question because I've noticed, at least from the site standpoint, I've had previous leaders where they're really scared to tell the CRA what's actually happening, why enrollment is so low. So, as a future CRA, how do you get the site, honestly, just to be honest, like, sites do exaggerate numbers of enrollment or
Yeah, they do. Okay, so you can ask them questions like, what has helped you in the past? What has helped you become a good enroller for a previous study? Or if they have worked with you in the past on a different clinical trial or a different drug, hey, when you did this trial, you were able to randomize XYZ patients. What were the strategies you use to get those patients in. So that's why I said you don't want to directly ask them that they over exaggerate on the feasibility questionnaire, because that might be obvious. If they told you they can give you 20 and they haven't even screened one, you know that's a possibility. So really, the best thing is just to ask them what you can do to help, because they might not necessarily be straightforward with you as to why they're having barriers. You're gonna know that if the study has been open 3 months and the enrollment period is only gonna last 6 months, well, they're halfway done and they don't have patience. So they don't have to admit to you that they're struggling. You see that, it's evident. But you do want to reach out and find out why. Because a lot of times the person above you is gonna come to you as if you can recruit for the site. I'm just be honest. Why is your site not enrolling? You're gonna get a lot of emails when y'all do the little CRA meetings and they talk about recruitment. Your site is gonna be in the bottom of the barrel, and they might reach out to you and ask you why. So you want to have documentation that, hey, I went to my leader and I asked if I can complete a booster visit. Now, sometimes booster visits are not related to recruitment. Booster visits can be related to, there are a lot of protocol deviations. And instead of you having to wait that 6 weeks or that 12 weeks to get back out to that site for your next monitor, hey, can I break away from the monitoring plan in this situation because my site has a lot of deviations and I'm afraid if I wait another 6 weeks, another 5 weeks to go out, they're just going to continue. Can I go out? So booster visits are very great for re-education, and it doesn't have to be on site. You could do a Zoom call with the organization. You can train just the person who keeps making the deviation. So I would prefer, so they won't feel singled out, I would encourage you to do the training with everybody who are assigned to that task. So if there's a lot of lab errors, I will get every study coordinator who is associated with processing the labs. If it's not on the collection side, but it's on the processing side, and they have a designated lab tech to just spin the specimen down and ship it off, but they're not waiting. Every time the lab get the kits, it's not enough dry ice. And then so the specimen is no longer any good. And that happens a lot. So then you want to get that person that processes those labs and make sure they understand, hey, you need to fill the box up to the top. If you are shipping out on a Friday, need to make sure you put that Saturday sticker on there so um they do next day shipping versus not giving. They doing ground and then they don't get it to that Monday. So you want to re-educate who needs the re-education. So booster visits can be done for different reasons, but typically it's for enrollment and re-education. Okay, so then we have the interim monitoring visits. Okay, once that first patient is randomized, these are the routine, remote, or on-site visits conducted to ensure the study is progressing as planned and the data is of high quality. All subsequent visits should be timed from the first IMV, and this is very important. Okay, so again, back to that monitoring plan that book that we depend on. It may tell you that you have up to 6 weeks to conduct a visit. That up to 6 weeks need to be based on this first monitoring visit. But for whatever reason, you go every 4 weeks versus every 6. That means you're going sooner. That's fine, as long as you based it off your first visit. Now, what some people were doing, and it was making them get out a window, they'll complete their first visit, and then they'll do the next one at the 4 week mark. But then that visit after that, the site didn't have that much activity, so then they did that visit at the 6 week mark. And then from that point on, they went every 6 weeks from that point on. That's going to get you out a window. So you want to make sure that you're conducting a visit based off that initial largest time frame. Now, if you go in between, you're good. But if you go beyond that, then you're going to get out a window. And typically that situation is caught when there's a lot of deviations. So a lot of times, the person above you are not going to notice that you're out a window until the site start having issues. Then they're gonna be like, "Well, you should have went more often, or you could have went more often, or you went beyond the visit window." And you need to explain in your narrative or your report why. So even if you got permission to go more frequently, so if it's every 4 to 6 weeks, but you was going every 3, it needs to be documented in your report why you're going out a window. Just the site has high enrollment, the site has quality issues. I didn't get a chance to complete an ISF review my last time based on a monitoring plan because I need to prioritize these tasks. So I had to go back to make sure that task is done. So whatever the reason is, it needs to be documented. When you're at these interim monitoring visits, you need to review SAEs and AEs. You need to review the informed consent documentation. What we're doing now, or what a lot of sponsors are doing now, is what's called risk-based monitoring. I'm not really a fan of it, but it is what it is. So basically, they have determined that there are these specific parameters of the study that they want us to review for everybody. And then there's other parameters that they want us to review for only a percent of the subjects. So, for example, a study I was on, they wanted all informed consents reviewed. They wanted all medication history reviewed. But for only 20% of that patient population, did they want you to review everything else? Or do source data verification, I should say. So that monitoring plan is going to outline, do I got to look at vital signs for everybody, or do I got to look at vital signs just for 20%? Do I got to look at drug administration for everybody, or do I got to look at drug administration for just 40% of the patients? So it's important to know because you don't want to waste time reviewing things that you don't have to review. And you don't want to not review things you should have reviewed. So you always want to review what you should review first. And if you have time and you want to spot check other patients, then I would encourage you to do so. Site management calls. So site management calls is those calls that you do in between your interim monitoring visits. So if you're supposed to go out every 6 weeks, you might want to do a phone call at the 3 or 4 week mark just to get a feel on how the site's doing. Let the site know that you are there for them. So a site management call is a communication, often by phone or video conference, between the site personnel and the CRA. This call can be triggered, meaning the protocol, your monitoring plan says if you have up to 6 weeks, but if you don't complete that visit within 30 days, then we want you to do a phone call. Some can be triggered again based on a lot of issues happening at the site. You need to do a site management call to get those things under control. And sometimes you want to just do a site management call to close out queries or issues. You don't want to wait till your next time you're on site because that's going to slow your progression of reviewing that new data down. So, if this site is recruiting 20, 30, 40 people in between your visits, you don't want to waste 3 hours just trying to close out things that happen from your previous visit. If you are allotted the opportunity to do a site management call, I would encourage you to do so because it's going to minimize the time you have to spend on site and it's going to keep you and your site more compliant. So, site management calls can be reviewed. You want to review all your vendor reports to assess the tasks you need to do. You want to close any open queries or site visit issues that you can close remotely. Not all issues you can close remotely. You have to be on site. You want to complete any re-education if necessary. You want to build a rapport with your site. So this is why site management calls are good because you never want to get a site to say, well, all the time we hear from them is doing a monitoring visit. So monitoring visits can be 3 months apart. You should never let 3 months go by before you contact your site. So even if it ain't nothing but a quick email, hey guys, how's it doing? Any changes to the site staff? Any changes to the facility? You want to shoot them an email to let them know you're still available for them. You want to assess the facility's condition. So any excursions happened with the storage of the IP since the last time I was on site? Are your calibrations still within window? You want to assess the facility. And you can do an abbreviated ISF checklist. Typically, if you had a protocol amendment or investigational brochure that was distributed to the sites um between the last time you was there and you did your phone call, but you're not on site for another 4+ weeks, you can go ahead and ask them for those documents. Hey, give me that. I need you to send me that protocol agreement. I need you to send me the investigative brochure acceptance form, and I'll go ahead and get that file because they're going to implement that protocol amendment. If the PI has signed and the IRB has approved, they're going to implement that new protocol. And if it's going to be a long time before you come back on site, you want to go ahead and make sure that they documented those things correctly before the implementation takes place. Okay, your termination or your closeout visit. So it is, the title's kind of self-explanatory. Once the study has concluded, so not just your site, you can't complete closeout visits just because your site is done. Once the study has concluded, um, from if you on nationally or globally, so you got other countries involved, you don't want to do a closeout visit until you have been granted permission to do so. And usually this is after all tests are done, the database has been logged. So that means all possible queries in the EDC has been, or in the vendors have been resolved. All required data has been verified that it has been completed. Then we can do the termination visit. It's always good practice to go on your site before that termination visit and make sure everything is done. That way, when you do your termination visit, is you can get quick and to the point. And so, if you know that though there are some documents like some trackers that need to be collected before the study is over with, collect those trackers to visit before you close out. If they already been finalized, don't wait till your final visit to do that. Don't wait till the last visit to make sure all IP has been destroyed. If the subjects have been done for a while now, and the protocol has allowed you to the site to either destroy or ship IP back to the vendor, make sure it's okay to go ahead and do that. Any task that you can complete before the closeout visit will better serve you. But during the closeout visit, again, you're gonna send that confirmation letter. You're gonna send that follow-up letter once your report is complete. You're gonna discuss the outgoing responsibilities with the PI. Those are typically the confidentiality agreement reiterated. Hey, do not disclose any information about this trial. Do not publish any information about this trial. You're responsible to store the source documents, to store the regulatory information for 3 years, at least 2 years on site. If you send it to a long-term storage, we need to know the address. If the long-term storage ends, like your contract with this company end and you shift to another company, the sponsor needs to know where that study material is now going to be located. You want to assess the destruction of the shipment of any study materials. So anything that should have been shipped back, you want to make sure that has done. You want to make sure they have documentation. So if they sent it by FedEx, if they got a email sent, a tracking number, you want to make sure they filed a copy of that tracking number. So if something get lost in translation, we know how to follow up. Usually only abbreviated ISF is required at this point because all study assessments are concluded. But there are some documents that you need to pull at that last visit. The delegation logs needs to be finalized. So all the staff need to have end dates. Usually this end date coincides with the date that you did the termination visit. You got to remind the PI or the regulatory team to report to the IRB all necessary documentation. So you let them know that the study is closing at this site and you need to close out also at the IRB. Now that form usually will happen after your closeout visit. Some people will not close out at the IRB until they get their final payment. So, so if there's a payment issue, discuss that with the PI so you can get the information to the necessary people to make sure the site is paid in full before they close out at the IRB. All right, it's quiz time. I'm not sure if our other person came back. Are you there? Um, Espinas? I don't want to pronounce your name incorrectly. Okay, he might he might be asleep. Okay, well, I guess this quiz is gonna be between you and I. Okay, so is the booster visit required and listed in the monitor plan as a routine visit?
I want to say no.
Correct. It is not. It is based on the circumstance surrounding that site. Will you conduct source data verification and review during the site initiation visit? And remember, the source is related to the patient information. Is this something that you will do during the site initiation visit?
No.
No, because no subject should be enrolled at this time. Correct. Okay. Will you complete a follow-up letter for the site management call?
I want to say no.
That's correct. So you can document your call via email. Like you send them an email, they respond back and schedule it. You can save that email and upload it to the trial master file and label it as relevant communication. But typically the system that you report your phone calls in, the CTMS, it has a checklist, and once you answer, you respond to those checklist questions, it populates a report. But it's not a follow up letter or something that you have to necessarily send to the site. Okay, so why is it important to know the principal investigator's availability time during an SIV and a COV, and a site initiation visit and a closeout visit? Why is it important to know the investigator's time?
So you can know what pertinent information is required for them to be present at during the presentations, and also what information in those presentations are okay if only the site staff are available.
Correct. And so both of these visits have that PI responsibility component. And so it's important to be able to discuss. Now, it has been times, well, CRAs have come to the site and then the PI had to abruptly leave and they don't come back. And they had to complete everything with everybody else but the PI. The site cannot do closeout. I'm sorry, the site cannot be green lighted until you have a discussion with the PI. So if that means the next day you have to do a Zoom call, just that PI, or a couple of days later, that's what has to take place because the site cannot be initiated and given the green light until that discussion with the PI has to take place. There's no delegate that can go in the place of a PI in this situation. Um, Hopefully you don't have to reschedule the SIV. Like it just depends on the study team if they're gonna make you come back out and physically be on site. But I'm hoping if you're able to do everything else, if you're able to do the tour, if you're able to talk to everybody else, hopefully they will accept a Zoom call. Same with the closeout. The site should not initiate closure at the IRB until that phone call, that conversation happens with the PI if they were not available at the closeout. So in all efforts, we need to schedule these visits where they will be on site, but we know things happen. And so those we need to document what happened and we need to follow the company's protocol, how to handle that situation. But typically, like I said, a Zoom call would suffice. A phone call would suffice for the closeout visit because it's not a physical presentation that you present into the PI. It's just some bullet point knowledge that they need to understand that's required. And we almost at the finish line. Um, and the last question, do you use the study protocol to follow the outlines of how a study will be monitored to ensure it adheres to good clinical practice, regulatory requirements, and study protocol? Do you use the study protocol for this?
No, you use the monitoring plan.
You use the monitoring plan. You have been an excellent student. A plus, A plus. Um, I hate the other seven people did not join, but I have really enjoyed your participation. Uh, Hopefully next Saturday, once they see bits and pieces on this on social media, they'll realize. Hopefully next Saturday will not be a storm and it'll go a little bit more smoother. But hey, but this lets you know this can happen in the CRA world. So maybe this was for our benefit to let you know things do not go as planned in clinical research. So you got to be able to adjust. I had to quickly use my phone internet. And that's what I'm still on because I just didn't go back to the house because I was too scared. Let's do some takeaways. Study coordinator takeaways. Ensure you conduct an appropriate visit by the protocol. So you just want to make sure follow the protocol. That is your what to do thing. Know when your PI medically qualified person is required for a visit. You do not want to come to a visit. A physical exam is required and there's nobody to do it because it makes the patient have to wait. It makes the site look unorganized. So we know at that visit, we need somebody to do a physical exam. We need to schedule that visit when somebody is in clinic. Properly document the informed consent or reconsenting process before completing assessments. I co-monitored when I had my first assignment at the previous company I worked for. We co-monitored a site in Miami, and they properly documented their initial consent form. But for every reconsent that they gave the patient, there was no documentation. So they didn't capture the time they gave the person that consent form. They didn't indicate they gave the patient a copy. They didn't indicate they gave the patient time to read it. So it's very important that the sites understand that they must not only document the initial informed consent process, they need to document all reconsents as well. Select appropriate source and supplies for visit. Just know if you're performing visit A, you got the source for visit A, you got the kits for visit A. Conduct re-education for non-compliant patients. This is so important. A lot of times CRAs will go to a site. We're going to use the e-diary because that's the common thing. And patients need to be at least 70% compliant per protocol. And you got this patient that's 69%, 50% compliant. And you talk to the subject, I'm sorry, to the study coordinator or the PI about this, their site's low compliance. But if you open a subject's chart and there's no documentation of the subject's low percentage, and there's no documentation of re-education. That is not a good representation of good clinical practice. If the subject per protocol should be compliant at least 70% and they're below that threshold, the site needs to have documentation of re-education. That can be over the phone, that can be during the visit, um, that can be bringing the patient back in for that unscheduled visit. But when we have a consistent show of non-compliance but no re-education, that can be a quality issue for the site. So we want to make sure that re-education is done for non-compliant situations, participants. And then we want to make sure that we encourage the site staff to build a rapport for their participants because again, we are here because they are there. Okay, the takeaways for CRA. We want to ensure we conduct an appropriate visit per our monitoring plan. So we don't want to do a qualification visit when it should be site initiation. We don't want to conduct the closeout when it should be in interim monitoring visit. So we want to make sure we are following our protocol. Because that's what auditors look at as well. So when an auditor comes in for a site, they're not just making sure that the site followed their SOPs. They're making sure that we followed our SOPs as well. Ensure you schedule an allotment of time for the PI, the primary coordinator, and the ancillary staff. So if you're on the unblinded side or you're dealing with if this is a trial that has an unblinded and blinded component as it relates to the investigational product, if you're an unblinded CRA, you need to make sure you have access to that pharmacist or the person who is over the study drug. So you won't necessarily talk to the PI in that situation. Your person of contact is the head unblinded person. It can be a Form D, it can be a nurse, it can be a study coordinator. As long as who's ever in charge, they'll be the person that you relay any overall issues to. Review the site source documentation, including case report files and the consenting process. You want to dress appropriately. Usually you'll have this discussion with your line manager. It's discussed during the onboarding process. It's not typically in a monitoring plan, but they typically don't want us to wear sleeveless stuff. They don't want us to wear jeans, and they don't want us to wear open toe shoes. Basically business casual. But those are typically the things that they don't want us to wear. You don't want to you for your site initiation visit and maybe your qualification visit, you might want to be more on the dressier side, a suit, because you know for sure you're meeting the PI and you're meeting a lot of the site staff, and you want to make sure you do a good impression. Because just like they're hoping that they're picked for the study, an investigator can choose to not want to deal with the CRO as well. If we come there dressed any kind of way, unprofessional, they can say, we don't want to participate. So how we present ourselves is not only a representation of us, but as a representation of organization. Take notes and review vendor studies systems before conducting a visit. So the reason why this is important, I worked for two different companies, and the way the company preps us for visits are different. So when I was with my first company, they provided us what was called an on-site packet. And in that on-site packet, they had already compiled all the reports. So they had already gone into the system and see who signed an informed consent since the last time you were on site, who had an SAE since the last time you was on site, what subjects have been adjusted in the IRT system, where subjects have been charted on. They had already done it. What documents are missing from the investigator site file or the ETMF? They had already done that, and it was so nice. So you would get that within 72 hours of your visit. It was an Excel spreadsheet, and you know what you needed to do. The company I am now, they have the different systems, but it's up to you to go into all those systems and pull those reports and compile what it is that you need to do. So uh it is not hard, but it can be time consuming. I because I go to my was going to my site so frequently, and I knew what documents I was pulling, I wasn't pulling. I didn't rely on the reports too tough. I just based on what I know I did the last time was I was there, and what I know I need to do the next time, because I will just go into my systems as is in real time, and look at my reports from the previous visits. Because once you build a relationship with your site, and once you get to know your site, you don't have to always necessarily use those systems to know what it is that you need to do. But in the beginning or during the enrollment period, it is good to use those systems. So just like the site staff should perform re-education to the participant, we need to perform re-education to non-compliant site staff. How I document my re-education, I have a verbal discussion with the person or persons that need to be in that re-education. Then I summarize my discussion in an email, and I send it to everybody who is tasked to that particular task. Like, say for instance, I know there's a lot of informed consent issues, so I would talk to who was available while I was there. Then I would summarize the issue that I noticed, and summarize what it is that they should be doing, and I will email it to the regulatory person and everybody that's attached to that task. That regulatory person is then instructed to upload it into their ISF, and then distribute it to everybody who's tasked so they can electronically sign it. The next time I come, I'll pull that document with all those signatures, and then I upload it to the ETMF. It covers yourself. A lot of sites don't like using individual training logs. So let's say, for instance, I trained 12 people on that topic. The sites don't like having to have 12 different training logs to say that that topic was done. They rather put everybody on one training log and let that do. So I prefer it that way as well. But to cover myself, I send it to everybody in email. This way they can't say they didn't get it. And then in addition to them being emailed the document, their regulatory person should have dispensed it to them as well. So, any questions?
I don't have any questions, but I want to just say thank you for having this session today. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so these are my social media outlets. So I do have, of course, my email address. I try to prefer documents be floated through there, because so I could just have a better way of storing them onto my computer and keeping records. And of course, you all found me on LinkedIn, so I have my LinkedIn. I have Facebook, Dr. Hood helping others overcome determinants. It's associated with my uh, primary Facebook page, but I was able to off branch a page directly just for this. Then I have YouTube, which I think I only have about 5 followers. So I encourage anybody who wants to follow me on YouTube. And then I have TikTok. So I have I'm blessed. I'm married to a videographer. So that's the person who's going to take these videos and clip them off. And so I'll do maybe a couple of minutes to TikTok, full discussions to YouTube, and Facebook, and a couple of shorts for LinkedIn. But just wanted to let people know where they might see their face. And I want to say thank you for participating, and for those at home who are eventually going to see this on social media, thank you for watching.